Welcome to the Run Out. I am your host, Neil Barrett. Thank you so much for tuning in, whether you are a first-time listener or you have been rocking with the Run Out for a while. I really do appreciate you taking some time to tune into the show. It has been a fun week in the lacrosse world. There were some big wins, some big surprises, and yeah, I finally got to see Duke play in person again, which was equal parts exciting and kind of miserable. But we'll get to that in a second. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder to like, subscribe, rate the show, whatever your platform lets you do. It really helps me keep this going and putting out episodes for you guys. But that is enough of that. Let's get into it. So about that Duke game, for those of you that don't know, I'm a huge Duke fan. I grew up in North Carolina, but about 2 years ago, my wife got a job in her home state of New Hampshire. So we moved up here, and I have been unable to attend a Duke game live and in person since then. So this past weekend, I got the opportunity to drive down to Boston and see the Blue Devils take on the Terriers at Boston University. And thankfully for me, they won, and I don't have to have awkward stance with you guys pretending like I didn't talk about me going to the game this past weekend. Unfortunately, though, the weather was awful. It was cold and wet, and that stadium sits right on the edge of the river, and there is just wind constantly blowing in. It was pretty much unbearable throughout the entire first half. And right as halftime started, the sky broke open and it started raining, and it was just absolutely unbearable. And so my wife and I decided to leave while I consider myself a sicko for the game and might have hung around. I got to be honest, it was pretty miserable. I would have been more inclined to stick around at least. My wife is not a sicko for the game, and I was not going to make her sit there and be cold and miserable throughout that. So we decided to go, but with any luck, I will get to see Duke in Boston later this season, maybe, and I will definitely stay for the whole game in that situation. Nickerson Field is a really cool old venue, like I said, right off of the banks of the Charles River. I learned while I was there that it is the former home of the Boston Braves and was the last stadium that Babe Ruth called home. But the experience could have been better. There wasn't even concessions at the field. I don't know if that's a normal thing. I don't know if they do that all the time or if that was just this time, but there were no concessions. There was a taco truck just outside of the stadium, but it was kind of in an awkward place and the line was very long. So nothing to eat. It was cold and rainy and miserable. Like I said, we checked out at halftime. The first half was a pretty good game. A little frustrating as a Duke fan that first quarter. Duke could not clear the ball against the 10-man ride. If I am John Danowski, all we're working on all week is the 10-man ride because it was that effective against the Duke clear. So many just frustratingly boneheaded decisions. Consistently, guys were beating the double trap and getting to the midfield line, and a defender was right in front of their face. And rather than trying to take that one-on-one, knowing that the two guys they just beat were behind them, they would stop and turn back into the double team and then force some stupid pass. I don't know. It was crazy and so frustrating to watch, especially in person where you could really see the whole field, and should have been out of hand probably early in the first quarter. I think Duke could have been up 4 or 5 if they could have gotten the ball to their offense. The offense was playing pretty well. The defense was playing very well. It was getting the ball from the defense to the offense that was so insanely frustrating to watch. But they did obviously ultimately pull away and win. And other than the fact that it was 2-2 at the end of the first, which felt more like Duke giving them that kind of position than anything else. I think Duke felt pretty comfortable this whole game. So not too much to sweat about. There was about 2 minutes at the end of the first period where I thought the first quarter, don't say period, the first quarter where I got a little worried, but they did pick it up in the second quarter and put some distance between them and Boston. And after that, I wasn't too worried about it, which was great because, again, the weather right at about halftime just really turned for the worse, and we were able to leave without too much guilt. Elsewhere, obviously, the story of the NCAA weekend was Rutgers beating Maryland 8-6. It was Rutgers' highest ranked win ever in their entire program's history, knocking off the second ranked Terps. Rutgers goalie Carden Stoller was easily the player of the game, and I believe a lot of people had him listed as the player of the weekend. He had 14 saves, only allowed 6 goals, and scored a dagger to seal the game on a full field goal with Maryland in a 10-man ride. Obviously, this has huge impacts on the rankings and what the tournament could look like as we head into these final 3-4 weeks of the season as we gear up for the NCAA tournament, which I will get to a little bit more in depth in just a minute. Perhaps the biggest game on paper heading into the weekend was Syracuse taking on Notre Dame. Syracuse did get the win in the Dome in front of a packed crowd, 14-9, behind a stellar performance from Joey Spallina, who had 4 goals and an assist to lead all scorers in the game. And hopefully that finally puts to rest the Joey can't do it in big games and Joey will struggle against good defenders arguments. He plays the way his team needs him to play. Sometimes that means being off ball, being a decoy. Sometimes that means being the QB behind the goal, making plays happen. And sometimes that is, as in the case against Notre Dame, being the guy putting the ball in the back of the net. And Syracuse is going to be absolutely fine if they can get anywhere near this level of production from him. I'm not worried about them in the slightest. After that, it is time for our weekly hot seat check in Columbus, Ohio, where the Ohio State Buckeyes beat the Johns Hopkins Blue Jays 14-10 to take sole possession of first place in the Big Ten. It's so funny to me still that the year the loudest claims that Nick Myers was sitting on a hot seat in Columbus, they have been arguably the best team in the country all season. Many people have them as their number one, though not everyone. And I think most major polls have them as number 2 behind Cornell. Speaking of rankings, I don't normally give you guys a top 5 or 10 or 20 or any of that. Rankings are really difficult. It's hard to really know who fits where based on what. You also have to keep track of a lot of teams in order to know, who's played who and won what and everything. And especially in that bottom half of the top 20, it can get real dicey and there's always going to be somebody complaining. And I just haven't really wanted to do that in the past, but I feel like the top 10 right now is fairly solid. And I felt like I could both provide you with a top 10 and the reasons for why I thought certain teams belonged in certain spots. So for what it's worth, this is how I see the top 10 right now. At number 1, I have Cornell, and number 2, I have Ohio State. The conversation here is, has Ohio State done enough to jump Cornell at 1? I'm not a huge fan of moving teams down for winning. So while I'm not as high on Cornell as perhaps most of the country is, I don't want to punish them for winning, even if it was somewhat unconvincing against Brown this past weekend. as I have said many times on the show, you can only play the team in front of you, and all you can do is beat them in whatever way you can. So again, I don't really want to move Cornell down for winning, and I don't know that there's quite a strong enough argument to have Ohio State jump them again while Cornell continues to win. At number 3, I have Princeton. I think that's fairly self-explanatory. And at number 4, I have Maryland. Even with the 2 losses, Maryland has put together one of the best resumes in the country. And for me, those 4 teams, Cornell, Ohio State, Princeton, and Maryland, have kind of separated themselves from everyone else. That does not mean that these 4 teams are unbeatable. Clearly, none of them are undefeated. And obviously, Maryland just lost to Rutgers. But I think they are kind of the cream of the crop. They are the best teams from this season. The rest of the top 10 is plenty capable, but has been much more inconsistent. I think these 4 teams have been the most consistent playing throughout the course of the season. I know that might sound a little weird considering that Maryland just lost, but this has been one of those seasons where it feels like everyone is capable of laying an egg at some point, and they just happen to choose a bad game to have their egg laid and should be fine as we move forward through the rest of the season. They may not win the Big Ten, but I would still have them as championship favorites for sure. Just behind that group is a group of a few teams that I think could be extremely dangerous. I have one of them as a Final Four participant and one as kind of a dark horse to be in that Final Four. So again, this next kind of batch is all very good, very capable teams that if they put it together for a few weeks in May, could be very, very dangerous and could maybe even potentially win a national championship, though I do think it will take some doing and meeting teams at the right time. Number 5, I have Cuse. Obviously, they had one of the better wins of the season this weekend, and it should remove all doubt that they aren't capable of winning it all this season. At number 6, I have Army. They are having a great season, one of their better seasons in recent memory. But for me, their season has missed some of the high-level wins of some of the teams above them. So even though they are 9-1 and teams above them have lost multiple games, they just haven't played the same level of schedule as the teams above them. So I do have them at 6. At 7, I have UNC. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. They are one of the teams that I think is likely to make a Final Four, though it does take some things breaking their way. And at number 8, I have Penn State. They are giving off such dark horse energy, and I think they could be a real spoiler for especially one of the teams listed above them in the rankings. They could take someone out early that we think is going to make a deep run, especially when they're healthy. They are so good. I know they recently lost 2 games, but I think that had a lot to do with some of their bigger name, better players returning from injuries at probably not a opportune time. When you come back from an injury, you want to work your way back in, and their first game was Ohio State, and then they played, I believe it was Maryland. So just looking at their losses is probably not the best indication of where they actually are as a team. Rounding out my top 10, I have number 9, Notre Dame, and number 10, Duke. People will call me a homer for that, but I think there's a pretty stark line of delineation between this top 10 and the rest of the top 20. That is not to say that there aren't plenty of good and very capable teams in the bottom half of the top 20. I wouldn't even be wholly shocked to see a Harvard or Rutgers or Michigan make a run in May and knock off a highly ranked team or two. on their way to, a quarterfinal or maybe even a semifinal team berth. But that being said, I just think that there is such a clear delineation between Duke at 10 and everyone else below them. At 10, for me, Duke feels like pretty much everyone above them is better than them, even Notre Dame, even if it's just kind of slightly, but they are also better as a team than everyone below them. Again, that doesn't mean they can't or won't lose to someone below them, but looking at the totality of their team versus those teams, I think they are the better team. There is obviously an argument to be made for Harvard, and I wouldn't be super pressed if anyone put Harvard above Duke. But one that I've seen a lot of people put above Duke is Richmond. And that one blows my mind because Richmond has one top 20 win this season. Duke has, I believe it's 3 last time I checked. And when you combine that with the fact that Duke beat Richmond, it doesn't make any sense, especially because so many people that I have seen having Richmond ranked above Duke are the same people that are suggesting games have to matter when they talk about ranking some of these teams above each other that have a head-to-head win. So how Richmond got put above Duke, I just don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. So that is my top 10. Again, I am probably not going to dive into the second half of a top 20 because I think there are probably about 100 different figurations for how you could set up 10 through 20. And you probably wouldn't be wrong on about 90 of them. So I am going to leave it at a top 10 and move on. I am not one for really crazy proclamations and hot takes. I do, however, have a slightly spicy take that I want to share with you and talk about, but it is not intended to be a hot take conversation. I am more than happy to listen to anyone who would like to combat this topic. I am not trying to be Stephen A. Smith and provide you guys with hot takes week in and week out, but Kevin Boland of the Lacrosse Network came out this week with a take suggesting that CJ Kirst would be a number 1 pick in any PLL draft ever. And that was something that a lot of people ran with, and there was a lot of discussion. And I just wanted to kind of give my thoughts on that because, again, I do have probably a little bit of a spicy take, though, again, it is not meant to be a hot take spouted for it. I will gladly listen to anyone who would like to argue the point with me. But my thought is this. CJ Kirst is Kieran McArdle with better marketing. And that is not meant to be an insult to either player. Kieran McArdle is one of the best pros over the last decade that we've had in the game. And I think he is vastly underrated, and both in his level and skill and talent, but also in his role. We do talk about it some, especially I think from guys like Carcaterra and Ryan Boyle. When they get in the call, I think they can see how important he is to what the Water Dogs do. But for me, it goes beyond just that stuff. And I guess I should start with the fact that this goes beyond the idea that they have similar play styles. I do think there are some similarities. They both kind of have thinner, taller frames. They both play with very high IQ and are known for their level of cerebral play. But it's not just that, X's and O's, they play similar ways. I think if Kieran McArdle went to Cornell or another Ivy League or an ACC school or a Big Ten school or something, he would have been probably a number 1 pick. He For those who don't know, he went to St. John's. He was the first player in St. John's lacrosse history to reach 200 points in his career and was also a Tewaaraton finalist out of St. John's. He was very, very good. He just was under-recruited, and that is part of my thinking that that CJ Kirst is Kieran McArdle with better marketing. People know who he is. He goes to a bigger school and a more lacrosse-centered school. And I think that if Kieran McArdle went to a bigger, more lacrosse-specific school, he would have broken records at those schools and potentially even in the NCAA if he was playing with higher-level talent on the field with him. Then I think he would have scored a bunch more points and would have likely been a number one pick as well. Conversely, as we project into the pros, I think that CJ Kirst will be a lot like Kieran McArdle in the pros, where he is clearly a very, very good pro. He puts up a bunch of points, and he is very, very important to every team he's played on, the way they play, the style of play, how they share the ball, all that stuff. But similar to Kieran McArdle, it's not his team. He's not seen as the guy. For the Water Dogs, it's Michael Sowers. For the launch in the MLL, it was Lyle Thompson. The places where Kieran McArdle and CJ Kirst's games do overlap, I think is where this really holds a lot of water. They both play a very cerebral game, like we talked about earlier. They're both very high IQ guys, but they're also very languid players. They don't appear to be exerting a ton of energy. When you put Kieran McArdle next to Michael Sowers, you can see Michael Sowers looks like a rubber band being shot. Like, you can see that explosion, you can see that speed, that dodging ability. And that's not to say that Kieran McArdle has any less ability. It's just that when you watch them, it doesn't look like he's having to put forth that level of energy. And because of that, because he's more of a heady player, he doesn't jump off the screen at you. When you combine that with the fact that he is a very kind of quiet, down-to-earth personality, he's not Ryder Garnsey chirping on the field. We're not miking him up for games. He's not involved in ad campaigns and all of this stuff. It just kind of serves to push him farther into the shadows, even with all of his immense talent. And I see that a lot from CJ. CJ will have some more opportunities based on the fact that he will be the number one draft pick and the expectations that come with that. But I do think that he is going to sit back a bit. And because of all of these things, even with CJ's talent, I don't think that he will be the superstar that a lot of people expect him to be. He will be, again, a very, very good, long-serving professional lacrosse player who is vital to his team's success. In a manner of speaking, I think you could argue that Kieran McArdle is more vital to that team's success than Michael Sowers is. Michael Sowers might be the best player or superstar, whatever, on that team, but I think you can at least logically make the argument that removing Michael Sowers from that team does less harm to that team than removing Kieran McArdle. So again, it's not to say that CJ Kirst won't be, again, a very good, long-serving pro who is vital to what his team is trying to do. It's just to say that I don't think he will be the superstar level player that a lot of people are expecting him to be. Even if we're only looking at PLL drafts, is he going above Brennan O'Neill and Connor Schellenberger? Is he going above Jeff Teat? Is he going above Grant Ament? I don't even think he'd go above Pat Spencer, even with the history of Pat Spencer, which obviously he didn't even play in the PLL. So again, no hate on CJ Kirst or Kieran McArdle. I just see them as very, very similar players when this is all said and done. And I don't think that that equates to being a number one draft pick in every draft ever, because as good as CJ Kirst will be, as long serving as he will be, I don't think that he is going to be that game changing, franchise altering superstar number one pick that he would have to be that level of player where he would go number one no matter what draft year it was. I don't know. Maybe you guys completely disagree with me about CJ Kirst. If so, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. If you're on YouTube, hit me up on social media, whatever it is. I would love to talk about this subject matter more because I do think it holds a lot of weight, but I am open to the possibility that there's more to it that I don't know. I will be 100% honest and say I don't watch every single Cornell game, though I have seen them and CJ play plenty of times. And again, I think very highly of CJ Kirst. I just think he's not going to be quite the player that some people have expectations for him to be. All right, let's talk some NLL action now. The Vancouver Warriors moved to 4-0 since they acquired Christian Del Bianco at the trade deadline. CDB saved 37 of 41 shots to hold the Albany offense to just 4 goals. With their final 2 games of the regular season coming against 2 of the bottom 3 teams in the league, they seem very likely to make the playoffs, despite being 5-7 at the time of the Christian Del Bianco trade. What an insane turnaround in Vancouver. They are, without a doubt, the hottest team in the league right now. And if they play to this level for the next 2 months, we could be looking at one of the craziest championship runs of all time. Either way, Christian Del Bianco seems to be worth everything that the Warriors went through, both in the trade and in the intervening time, if anyone is aware of that story, and trying to get a hold of him. Moving on, the seemingly never-ending back and forth for first place between Buffalo and Saskatchewan took another turn, with Saskatchewan losing to Calgary 10-6 behind Nick Rose's career high 57 saves, and Buffalo using a 10-goal second half to run out of Colorado with a 15-10 win to recapture first place in the overall standings. If that holds, Buffalo will maintain home field advantage throughout the rest of the regular season, but the Rush has 2 more games to see what they can do about that. In Rochester, Connor Fields dropped 9 points to lead the Nighthawks over the Black Bears 12-6 and keep the pressure on in the MVP race. Only having 1 game left over the final 2 weeks of the NLL regular season will hurt his chances of actually pulling down that MVP award, but with his last game against the woeful Toronto Rock, a big game could seal the deal and earn him his first MVP award. I am kind of hoping this, as much as I love Dane Smith and Josh Byrne and would have absolutely no problem with them winning the MVP. I would love to see Connor Fields pull this off and win the MVP this season. I think he is one of probably the top 5 best players in lacrosse, period, regardless of what the style is that you are playing. At least offensively, we can get into guys who play more defensive or even goalie positions, but at least offensively, He's one of the 5 best players on the planet, and I would love to see him get some recognition for that. I also would have him fairly high in a preseason poll of potential MVP candidates for the PLL season. That would be a really, really cool thing to see someone win the MVP in the PLL and NLL in the same season, but we will have to wait and see what happens there. All right, that is going to do it for this week's episode, keeping it relatively short. I do, again, really appreciate you guys tuning in, whether you listened, watched, or just had me on in the background while you were doing the dishes. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave a review, whatever your platform of choice allows you to do. Show some love to the show. It really, really does help us keep putting these episodes out for you guys. Along those lines, I am looking for some ideas for people that we could have as guests on the show over the next couple of weeks and months. So if there's anyone that you guys want to hear from, let me know in the comments, in my DMs on social media, whatever it is. Get a hold of me. Let me know who you guys want to see, and I will see what I can do to get them on the show. With a ton of big games coming this weekend and the NLL wrapping up its regular season and heading into the playoffs, there will be plenty of things to talk about in next week's episode of The Runout. So until then, I'll catch you guys on the internet.